Hello, and welcome to this episode of A Rule of Carnage, and welcome to this episode of A Rule of Carnage, a podcast, a YouTube channel, a place where myself, Glenn Ford, a games designer and developer, chats to this guy, Mike Hutchinson, also a games designer and developer. So usually at this point in the intro, I list some things we've worked on to prove our credentials as knowing what we're talking about. This time, I'm not going to do that, apart from mentioning one book that we have both written, which is coming out at the end of this month, which is the Fundamentals of Tabletop Miniatures Game Design. A writer's, a
Designer's
designer's
Handbook.
handbook, a designer's
Oh, Glenn
handbook.
almost got the title right.
Well, I try. I foolishly try and do it from memory rather than
Yeah,
having
I have it literally open in front of me.
which is coming out from CRC Routledge Press
Hmm.
towards the end of this month. So we've mentioned this book a few times on the channel, but it is now available to pre-order. And we're going to have a link in the down below bits where you can go across and pre-order it right now. So we thought we'd talk a bit more during this conversation over the next few about what exactly is in the book, why you might want the book,
Hmm.
why it could be useful. Because obviously, if you're watching this channel, you might say, well, Glenn, you've got hundreds of videos here laying out your opinions on game design. Why would I want to bother buying such a book? To which I would say, first of all, shut your damn mouth, you cheeky person. But yeah, so there are some things about the book I think that make it worthwhile, even if you've heard all of our blathering on these conversations.
Definitely, yeah.
I
And
mean,
who's it for? Who's it for?
well, I think it's for people who are obviously trying to design a miniatures game.
Yep.
Um, it does a few things. I think first of all, it lays out a progression of designing a game from some of the basics, and we'll talk about exactly the sections and late conversations. Through to some advanced ideas. It lays out concepts that you're going to sort of need to have your arms around before moving on to full design. So it is a sort of a full progress of sequence through from starting with some very overview concepts and getting right down into the details. So I think it has a nice progression because it's like it may or may not be obvious that what we do on the YouTube channel is we rock up, we piece together some notes maybe on a conversation, and we pretty much talk about what's in our mind that week, what we've been dealing with, designing, working on, and there isn't necessarily the most sort of linked up process going through some of these videos. Where in
Yeah,
the
so
book,
we've got a bunch of ideas and thoughts, but they aren't structured very well. And it was really enjoyable, the process of this book, having the opportunity to go back over some of the stuff that we talked about, some of the conversations that we'd had, and then like asynchronously between the two of us and like iteratively actually knock some structure and some legibility into some of those ideas and present them in a more coherent way. I think I will add to who is this book for? I will add that if you are a newish designer, there's tons to get stuck into here. If you are a more experienced games designer, I hope that you will, like I did, find lots of interesting and challenging ideas in this book as well. There's plenty of ideas in this book that I have literally since writing the chapters on it gone off to use and implement. I'll no doubt talk a bit more about how the dice chapter inspired the design of Space Kits over the last year. But also, if you are not a designer and not planning on designing a game, but you are a fan of miniatures games, and like me, you like reading kind of non-fiction stuff around that thing that you like, we try to pack the book with tons of examples. So your favorite games will be mentioned, and we'll look at a bunch of different systems and example implementations from all kinds of miniatures games from all over the history of miniatures games. So I hope that if you are kind of a curious Rule of Carnage sort of intrigued by how we analyze these games and think about them because you like playing them and reading them, then there should be plenty in our book for you as well.
absolutely, yeah. I think there's a couple of things there. I think, I'd like to sort of go in on a little bit. Is like while the book itself sort of flows through you sort of more logically than maybe some of the videos. Each of the chapters has been designed to be something where you can drop into, you know, if you're getting stuck, having a bit of writer's block on a particular issue, a particular mechanic, each sort of chapter is a standalone sort of examination of a particular mechanic or area. So hopefully, while you can read the book cover to cover and sort of progress through it, you can also pull it off the shelf, flop it open at a particular chapter, you know, work through that when you're sort of struggling with something, and it should hopefully sort of drop in some extra inspiration. Hopefully it can be
exactly.
a dip in.
I think there's, over the first few chapters, like particularly the first section, there's a bit of a developing story where we kind of build on topics and build on ideas, but yeah, as you say, like it's not one of those books where we're sustaining a single argument for multiple chapters and therefore you got to read them in order. This is, you know, to some degree a dip it in whilst you're on the toilet, or when you've got it, you know, off to the side, when you've, you know, you're wrestling with card mechanics and you just think, oh, is there something I'm missing here? And we don't cover everything, but like we cover, I think in a lot of the chapters, we'll cover a bunch of things that only turn up, ideas that are only maybe explored in a handful of games, as well as those ideas that are almost entirely ubiquitous. And so there's plenty of stuff to bounce off of in the book, which should send you in novel directions or point you in the direction of games that you might not have read or played that have got some intriguing ways of attacking common problems.
Absolutely, and I think that's the other thing I sort of want to mention is that, you know, whilst we sort of do a little bit thinking about some of these conversations and we have sort of hopefully a background of knowledge on this subject, writing the book, you know, has been an opportunity to sit down and actually research a particular topic as we're writing it, really sort of go through the background. And for me, like particularly is sometimes on the channel we'll mention a particular game in sort of quite overview sort of manner, but I don't always want to sort of get very detailed in what's in that game, primarily because, you know, I don't want to sort of misrepresent a game and get it slightly wrong and sort of suggest it does something that it doesn't exactly do. Whereas in the book, we've been able to go in and do sort of case studies on certain games because of, you know, I'm writing it with the rules in front of me and I can like make sure I'm really sort of doing justice to that particular game, where I talk through a particular mechanic, how it works, what it does in that game, why they used it in that game, its strengths and weaknesses, and it's been able to be sort of genuinely fair to examples, you know, of games that we're picking out. So other things,
and when we're talking about the number of like those examples and stuff, like there's not a case study for every single mechanic that we cover, but like I can't remember what the final list was, but like there's probably close to 100 miniatures games that we mention at various points, different miniatures games.
Yeah, I think it's pretty extensive, and also we've made an effort to obviously sort of you know, play the hits and mention the big games that most people are going to be familiar with, but also
yes, my job in this relationship, gentle listener, was to be the person who has played Modern 40K and Age of Sigmar, which Glenn has remained blissfully pure of.
Yes, no, I've been sort of absolutely grinding through like Wargame Vault and places like that, reading lots of independent.
Yeah, that's been your job.
weird
mincing through the indie darling scene.
Yeah, lots of sort of independent.
I meant that not as dancing, but as meat grinding. But maybe it's both.
But like, yeah, so that hopefully those examples talk about some bigger games that most people are familiar with, but also pick out some genuinely unusual sort of unsung games and point out them some sort of unusual and interesting trends, some things that are bubbling under maybe in the indie sort of design scene, and some sort of interesting ideas that people are developing where you might want to go like, okay, you know, this could be a new direction to go in. Obviously, you know, not obviously, but one of the other things about the book is, frankly, there are people who have asked us whether, you know, there is a book on designing these sorts of games. And the answer has been, well, honestly, no. There is one, and it's an excellent book, but it's more about sort of preparing the game that you've got to a degree for sort of presentation, pitching, you know.
Yeah, that's right. That's Rick Priestley's Tabletop War Games.
Yeah,
and it's a good book, and I've enjoyed it and read it several times. But as you say, it doesn't really get into it doesn't spend any time as we do considering what it is these games are and where the boundaries of them lie, and it doesn't spend anywhere near as much time as we do going into the specific mechanical options that you have. I
Yeah,
think partly because Rick is a fairly old hand at a certain kind of game, and so he writes a certain kind of game. Like when I compare his output to someone like Andy Chambers, who isn't exactly the same generation, but comes from that same kind of team. And Andy Chambers has experimented with dozens of different kinds of mechanical types, and so I think we're really interested in a book that is about game design and what it is that the technology that you've got available for making miniatures games. And so I think that sort of like that's one of the reasons why we were so keen to try and figure out like what these games were. Partly because we were given this opportunity. We were approached what, like, is it 3 years ago? Could be three. It's like definitely 2.5 years ago at this
yeah,
point.
it feels like about that.
And
Uh,
we were given this opportunity. So we got an email out of the blue from someone who had discovered the channel, no doubt because when you Googled tabletop miniatures game design, you just got a list of our YouTube videos for some reason. This is back when we had the glorious first 300 subscribers.
yeah, yeah.
OGs, thank you for
It,
being with us.
yeah, it's more important to be a medium-sized fish in a tiny pond than to
Yeah,
be
exactly.
a
And anyway, they sent us an email saying, "Hello, random YouTube people. We our game design, our video game design textbooks have been doing very well. Thank you very much. But we're looking to do more tabletop stuff. Would you guys be interested in pitching a book around miniatures?" To which we had a very, very brief conversation where we both went, "Yep, yep." And then my wife's an academic, and so she has some experience sort of constructing these kinds of pitches and abstracts. So we went through a process of building um, a sort of chapter listing of what we thought we were going to cover and an abstract for each of those chapters to try and figure out where we thought, which like to a degree sort of felt like maybe writing down the like playlist of our channel to begin with. But quite early on, we realized we wanted if we were going to be given the opportunity to write a book about miniatures design, then we were, by God, we were going to write a book about miniatures game design. And we wanted to cover some of the like fundamental philosophical questions of like how do I describe what it is that I make, and how is it different to the other things that exist, and why the hell doesn't it have its own name?
Mm. And I think like one of the things in researching the book that became very quickly clear is that there's a good deal of writing on video game design.
Mm,
There's some writing on board game design. There isn't writing on designing these sorts of games. And like as Mike
right.
mentioned, we came up with a sort of original chapter list that went through the process of like pitching it and peer reviewing, and it became very quickly obvious that we weren't going to get all those chapters in within the word limit. And some of the things that aren't in the book are things like a sort of play testing process particularly, and part of the logic behind that is there are some things that don't vary massively between like one form of video game design or certainly board game design, and particularly like the playtesting process is one that's fairly similar for board games.
Well, and to a degree, like the the initial concept phase of like how do you get ideas, like how do design principles get worked out, like what would a design brief that you want to stick to, like those things can be shared between RPGs and board games and digital games, and to a degree the end of that process as well, like how do I engage with a publisher, how do I write clear rules, like those things again, those can be shared between different genres of games.
Yeah.
So we were, as Glenn's pointing to, like just interested in like what's different, what is special, what's magical about these, like why have we been obsessed with these games since we were kids, like why is my brain only thinking, like when I try and design a game, why is the only game sort of genre that excites me this one, or the one that excites me the most, like there's something about them that no one has been able to draw a little ring around. And so we wanted to have at least a crack
Mm.
at publishing something which draws a little ring around what a miniatures game might be or might not be. Um, Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like if we've got, 100,000 word book to write on this subject, we didn't want to be retreading the ground that other books have covered, that you can use how to get your board game published book to cover a lots of the processes on how to get your minis game published, or
Yeah.
how do you sort of make a design document for any given game will work pretty much okay for a miniatures game.
Mm.
But there are other things that are unique to these games, and that's what the book is sort of really trying to focus on, and really trying to fill in. And I think one of the things about writing the book for me, and I think Mike, you said the sort of same sort of thing, is that if the main thing that the book does is open up sort of a critical discussion and critical thinking about these sorts of games, and if we put it out there and the first thing that happens is somebody else writes a book like in response to it, and sort of examining some of the ideas that we've brought
Or
up.
even if just there's a subsection of people who disagree with some of the ideas in the book, like that's fab.
Yeah,
That's
it is one of
that
these
would be
things
amazing.
where there is.
Already like coming back to some of the chapters recently, I'm starting to disagree with some of my own thoughts because of evolving thoughts on it, and that's fine. That's what this is going to be.
Yeah, and because there isn't writing on this area, and somebody has to step up and make some sort of statements about what's going on so that people can respond to it, so that we can start hopefully having a bit of a sort of critical area around these things.
Yeah,
uh,
and it's this channel is fairly unique uh in this space. Like I listen to a lot of podcasts on miniatures design, and there are a couple of really good ones out there, but there aren't really any from a sustained point of view of like people trying to make these things and critically assess them. And so, you know, our garbage channel, which we don't really plan our conversations, and some of our conversations maybe don't end with any particular outcome. Like what I've been so delighted about that turning into a Discord server is that like it's actually started a conversation where there's constant, different points of view and discussion about these particular topics, and realizing that there's a diversity of opinions on this, and getting this conversation moving, I think is I don't know. Like for me, that's been a really surprising and delightful thing to be able to get going, because I'm so obsessed with these games anyway. I'm going to be making them regardless. I'm going to be blogging about them, and we're going to be talking about them regardless. If this book and the channel results in more conversation about it, and we can all get better at this thing, then that's literally the mission statement. Like designing better miniature games.
yeah, and I think like it could be a fair question as to why us to write this book, and but it's like I
Yeah,
think
I mean, yeah.
what
Why?
became
Why anyone? We were given the
yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah, and it's the thing. It's like what became fairly quickly obvious in the sort of the peer review process with the book was the answer was kind of, well, they're as good as anybody at the moment, because they're like,
Yeah, and it's literally like there's no one better, and that's not because we're amazing. It's
no,
because there's literally like there isn't like a central academic voice that should have been the first person to write this book.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. A lot of the peer reviews came back sort of saying like, yeah, they're genuinely
They'll
as qualified
do.
as anybody, because nobody is particularly inherently qualified to do this.
Yeah.
By sort of by extension, these guys are apparently as close as
Well, and
they
the
can.
other peer reviewers are all also freelance jobbing game designers. And they're like, oh, somebody else is going to waste their time writing this book. Yeah, go on, because I've got to get some paid gigs done.
Yeah, it is sort of like it's a niche of a niche of an industry, and yeah, we knew a lot of the names popping up on the peer reviews, because it is like, yeah, who else are you going to go to? We know most of the people who do this, so but yeah, so I think like being able to maybe put our head above the parapet and make some statements,
Mm.
if only so that somebody can disagree with those statements, I think hopefully is at least something that's valuable about the book. um I think also like we've been doing this YouTube channel for a while. There's something like 300 odd videos on the channel, and while I try to sort of order it and title it so that things aren't too difficult to find, it's
Mm.
pretty tricky finding a particular video on a particular subject on the channel, and then getting to the bit of the video where we say the thing that you're interested in. And I think definitely having like a book version of these things is going to make the information that much more searchable and concise and just easy to get to. It's a practical tool, hopefully, when sometimes our conversations are maybe something you pop on to like listen to, somebody talk about the thing that you're interested in, and hopefully you get something out of it, but it's not going to have the consistency of like getting to what you want to sharply and quickly, which the book hopefully will have, with like a proper contents page and a proper index and all those sorts of all those good things to help support you answer the question you're actually asking at that particular moment. So I guess like giving a bit of an overview of why this book and why us, we've talked a few times in the past about roughly what happened and why we got picked up for this book. I think it might be interesting to run a little bit through the process of like,
oh sure, yeah,
how it happened, a little bit of the anecdote. Like as Mike was saying, a few years ago, somebody from CRC Press did a search, and apparently we dominated the first page of Google results if you search for how to design tabletop miniatures games. They reached out to us. As Mike mentioned, we sort of put in a proposal that ran for a peer review. And then we went through, a sort of a good, like for myself, like at least sort of 6 to 9 months of just like researching, reading, getting backup information on these things, working through what literature there is for board game design, some video game design, just consuming rule sets at a real pace, and then sort of going back and breaking down that chapter structure, I think, a bit. Like I say, it became quickly obvious, like on writing the chapter on dice mechanics, the chapter list we had written was wildly ambitious for
we'd scoped out probably twice as many chapters as we were going to need. We were given a word limit of 100,000, and we thought, well, these are the topics that we want to capture. I'm sure that'll fit. We can write 1,000 words on each of those. That's about a blog post on each one. But of course, these chapters aren't blog posts. They need a bit more structure and thought. And once the chapters end up being kind of 2 or 3 times as long as you expected, we were just like, oh yeah, we should. But actually, that gave us a way of focusing the book, and that, what Glenn was saying earlier about cutting out some of the like process of making a game to allow us to focus just on what makes miniatures games. That was sort of a necessary. We had to make a cut somewhere, and that just became a really easy way of like, conceptually we can cut out all of this stuff that isn't purely about the kind of mechanical technology and philosophical implications of what a miniatures game is and how you make one.
Yeah, and then sort of coming a bit more clearly into focus of the structure of the book, the nature of the book. We sort of rejigged the chapters, and I think this is one of the things again that's valuable about writing the book as opposed to the videos, is that much like writing a rule book, sometimes you write things down and you realize halfway through, no, this has to go before that has to come after that, this is a foundational concept for that thing. And so the process of moving the chapters around, getting them in the right order, and realizing like, no, you need to know this before you can know that. You need to know about sort of terrain rules before you can start talking about line of sight, or vice versa, whatever it happens to be. And so like going through the process of working it into a logical structure, and then like putting down the words. And again, we went through, I guess it's sort of a good year and a half of like getting the words down and then going back and forth between the two of us of like rewriting.
Yes, but although using our own inimitable processes, where Glenn is very much the do a little, do it often, and Mike is the sleep in a cave for a year, wake up and cram.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like to call it a bursty workflow.
Yes. My process is like, if I do a mere like 500 words a day, I'll be like a year ahead of the deadline.
Yep.
It'll be lovely and comfortable.
I mean, it logically makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it was like, yeah, putting the words down and then being able to go back over and go back in, and each of us to go like, you know, okay, I think I think you've missed the point on this thing, or your voice is not quite right here, and to go back and forth. And I think hopefully
Yeah,
with it,
and some of the chapters were kind of more straightforward insofar as like writing the chapter on dice mechanics. Like there's loads of great information in it, but it was just a chapter on dice mechanics. Some of the other chapters did literally get rewritten from scratch 3 times because it was hard to cover. It was hard to find exactly what it was that we were trying to say because it was such a novel area.
yeah, absolutely. It's like, yeah, when you're writing a section on stochastic uncertainty, it's like, well, this is the word for it, and this is what it is, and this is what it can do. Whereas when you're getting into things like player motivations,
Yeah, or that chapter about like what is it that these games do well, and why should you have one of these game? Why should you make a game idea into one of these versus another? Yeah, there was, and I think we wrestled for a long time with questions of genre and fantasy and how they connect to your design process. So yeah,
yeah, yeah, because again, it's one of these things where it's like, because there isn't, even where there is scholarly and academic writing on games generally, there isn't a massive amount, of really sort of examining. And we're not going to get into the question of what a game is. Those sorts of ideas. It's not useful, and not necessary in this process.
yeah,
But it does mean that sometimes where we're trying to say, okay, what are these games as opposed to other games, where the definition of what a game really is and what it does, like artistically, is already nebulous, meant that there was a sort of a lot of going back and forth and going, right, well, we've got to do a certain job here. And we're not going to try and define an entire field of art in a philosophical manner.
yeah, but it is important to understand like in a knotty area like fantasy, like the fantasy that a game provides and how it does it. Like there's something magical about the way that miniatures and like the openness of creating your own terrain and creating your own armies and creating your own, like there's something magical about that as a designer you want to be able to understand what that is so that you can switch on as many of those switches as you can and make the game as exciting and as engaging for the player. So we did need to burrow down to like trying to figure out like, okay, well, how is it that minute what is it about miniatures games that allow me to evoke a fantasy and an ownership of the world inside a player's mind that, that is worth thinking about as a designer? And yeah.
Yeah, and like hopefully, we've both got blogs. We sort of putting out opinions, sort of separately, and hopefully some of those more sort of digressive areas, like what is a game as as an art form, is something that we can cover in other places that people can find by.
For example, if you go and join Glenn's Patreon today, you could discover the answer to this knotty question.
Yes, if you do read the book and then read my blog on my Patreon, you might well see where I was going through, like, the questions of what is a game as an art form, and going, right, well, I can't put this in the book. It's sort of, this needs to go somewhere else. It's not part of the through line here. And being able to go like, okay, well, I'm going to do 2,000 words on, get game as art, as opposed to other art forms. And hopefully there are places you can delve more into some of those questions that weren't appropriate for the book, but the book is trying to go, okay, look, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, and this is how we're going to put it together, and do some of the mechanics and some of the literal sort of spade work of designing a game.
So speaking of the spade work, I think we'll probably sign off in a short minute here. But over the next few weeks, if you will indulge us, we will continue to describe in a bit more detail some of the stuff that you can find in the book. In particular, there are like 3 chunky sections in the book. One sort of philosophical overview and digestion. One about the general kind of raw materials that all game mechanics will be made out of, and sort of examination of some of the affordances and abilities of those kind of dice and cards and measurements and stuff. And then the third section is this massive list of the things that you will need to write systems for, likely, you know, stuff like activation and ranged attacks and wounds and whatnot, and scenarios. So we'll, I think, spend a bit of time over the next few weeks delving into some of that, which will probably also provide some very helpful summary videos for people new to the channel. Go watch these videos.
Yeah,
but yeah, if
yeah. As I said, there will be a link in the down below to the pre-order page on CRC.
Yes, have a rummage in our down belows.
Have a rummage in our down belows. Also on that page, even if you're not going in there to pre-order, there is a chapter list sort of available.
Yeah.
So you should be able to sort of look and see some of the things we're going to talk about in the next few conversations, and see the sort of the flow that we've tried to go with for the book.
And happily, if you go to the Routledge link that's linked below, then they deliver worldwide for free. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can get the book. Do order the paperback. It's the one with the colourful cover. The hardback is the tedious, no colour cover, library only version. You weren't going to order it anyway. It's £100, but yeah.
You're not getting something massively extra for that money. See, they are an academic publisher. They do an edition for universities and libraries, and they are not necessarily intended for the general public. It's a hardback, but it doesn't look as nice. It hasn't got a nice cover. And
if you are a games design lecturer at a university, then do get in contact, and we'll be delighted to figure out a way to get this material into a curriculum, or you know, we'll give talks.
Yeah, no, yeah, we're more than willing to.
Now that we've got a book to hawk.
Absolutely. Yeah, so as I say, do delve into the down belows. Along with the link across the Routledge, there are going to be links there to our pre-mentioned Patreons, where you can swing by and support us just in doing this, but also
you think we're making money off of the fundamentals of tabletop miniature games design?
Yeah. Also get get some further insight into the processes and our opinions on these things.
Yep.
Swing by our websites and buy like the games that we have written and made, because that'll give you further insight into our design process, and also get you a game in the process, which is a double win. Link over to the Discord. Come and have a chat about the book if you're interested in it. You know, what about it that you're sort of looking forward to checking out. Hit on the like and subscribe when you're down there, and swing down to the comments section, you know, and let us know like whether you have struggled to find, you know, books, academic sort of discussions, design texts in this area, because I know I have. You know,
equally, I'd love to hear recommendations from you in the comment section about what game design books you have found useful for miniature games design, even though they're not about it. And
absolutely
a bunch for me.
But for now, I think from this conversation and this Rule of Carnage, it'll be a thank you and goodbye. So bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.